A fire was set outside the doors of a Vancouver synagogue last night. It's the latest in a string of anti-Semitic incidents in the country. Police in Canada's 3 biggest cities have launched investigations into attacks on Jewish institutions. As Thomas Daigle reports, it comes as Toronto police have presented new hate crime numbers.
Call the rabbi.
Community members rushed to put out the flames and call fire crews to this Vancouver synagogue. Jewish leaders say at about 9:30 Thursday night, someone poured fuel and set a fire in the front doorway. No one was hurt, but the rabbi says the attacker must have known that would be the time worshipers would be leaving.
It seems very brazen for someone to attempt this, and it obviously makes us feel very vulnerable.
It's the latest in a string of similar attacks in Canada's biggest cities, with Montreal police called Wednesday night to a Jewish school hit by gunfire, just days after the community rallied outside a Toronto Jewish girls' school, also struck by bullets, with suspects seen fleeing in an SUV.
And we should all be concerned not just at the attacks that have taken place, but about what's likely to come next.
At a public meeting, Toronto police laid out new figures showing reported hate crimes reaching a 10-year high. Anti-Semitic acts alone doubled in 2023, coinciding with the October 7th attack in Israel.
What concerns me the most is also the clear fact that there's underreporting in some types of hate crime.
Muslims also accounted for one of the most commonly targeted groups, with this suspect caught on video throwing rocks at a Toronto area mosque.
There's over 2/3 of hate crimes that happen that the police probably aren't aware about.
The Prime Minister said on social media, "This is not the Canada we want to be," while this Liberal MP rose in the House of Commons.
Enough is enough. Canadian Jews have a right to be safe in our country.
Both here in Toronto and in Vancouver in recent days, police have said they're stepping up patrols near Jewish institutions. Thomas Daigle, CBC News, Toronto.
And you recognize this next guest from Thomas's story there. Andrew Rosenblatt is the rabbi of the Congregation Schara Tzedeck, pardon me. We have reached him in Vancouver. Thanks so much for your time today, Rabbi.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure to be able to talk to you, but unfortunately not the occasion that I had hoped it would be. Give me my first appearance here.
No, absolutely, and I'm so sorry for what has happened. The Shabbat's at sundown. How are you and the people in your community doing?
I think we're a little bit dazed and confused. We thought Vancouver was a little bit of a different place, although maybe we had no real. Maybe we should have known, because really there was a firebombing at a synagogue in Vancouver in 1985. Temple Shalom was firebombed, and we've been seeing a rising fever pitch of anti-Semitism and a sort of a mainstreaming of anti-Semitism, a matrix of tolerance for acts of exclusion of Jews from buildings, from professional organizations, the canceling of Jewish events for our quote unquote our own safety. And we've known that there's a trajectory, and I guess out here in British Columbia, we've seen some of the highway closures and some of the intimidation tactics that take place in Eastern Canada, and we didn't think that this really belonged here. And I guess we're a little bit surprised that beautiful British Columbia also has an unseemly underbelly of hate.
A synagogue is such an important place for people of the Jewish faith, and really for yourself, a home, a second home, I would think. What was your initial reaction when you heard that there was a fire at your synagogue?
My initial reaction was really disbelief. Like, wait, what are you telling me? Like, it was no, that can't be so. But you cannot mistake what happened there. You cannot mistake the char marks. You cannot mistake the smell of an accelerant. You cannot mistake the fact that there was somebody who tried to set a building on fire, but for maybe a lack of skill, maybe not lack of proper planning, or that he didn't succeed. But we could be talking about a synagogue in ashes now. This wasn't just somebody threw a Bic lighter. It was a significant amount of fuel used to try and start this fire.
And then, so what?
To just go further on this, this was in the middle of Oak Street, central thoroughfare, Highway 99 in Vancouver, 9:30 p.m., plenty of traffic, still people awake in the apartments across the street. This was, it wasn't broad daylight, but it was not far from doing that, in full view of the neighborhood.
And I understand members of the congregation were actually present or came upon this. What exactly did they do?
So our services straddle sundown. And so sundown was approximately 9 o'clock. We finished maybe 9:20, and people were filing out of the building. I had myself had gotten to my car, drove home. Some people were chatting on 19th Street, which is directly perpendicular around the corner from where the incidents happened. And they heard a bang, maybe like a car backfiring. And they didn't think much of it because occasionally you hear that in the neighborhood. And then someone drove by and said, the front of the building is on fire. And VFD told us that there was a pillar of fire was on their report. And if you go up to the second floor, you can smell the accelerant, you can smell the fire touch there. And so you had this big sort of pillar of fire, scorched the entire doorway. And when the people came around the corner, it had exhausted itself significantly, but there was still some remnant of the fire. And he took off his coat and doused the fire, stomped on it a bit, and extinguished it. The other details I'm leaving a little bit short because VPD has an ongoing investigation and they don't want to give out too many of these details.
Yeah, well, in the pictures that we're showing here of the scene, I see that there's a security camera at that front door. So I'm assuming that is part of the investigation. But I have time for one more question. And really the only thing I'm asking myself here is, do you feel safe? Do the members of your community feel safe? What needs to happen to make you feel safe?
Well, let's start with the last part of the question. What needs to happen to make us feel safe? We feel that government needs to enforce its laws. When people are excluded physically from entering the Hillel House on campus at UBC in the presence of an RCMP officer, that officer has to do his job, and the Attorney General has to tell the officer that you have to do your job. It doesn't matter what cause someone is protesting for. If they're blocking a Jewish person entering the Hillel House on public land, that is simply unacceptable. It can't be tolerated in Canada. We need people who are acting on funding of terrorist organizations. We need the government to ensure that Canadians are not being funded by arms of terrorist organizations. Are we going to feel safe? We are going to feel safe in the way that Jews, unfortunately, have been forced to feel safe. We're going to take our own security into our own hands. Those cameras are a perfect example of that. We have invested massive amounts of money in that. We could fund an entire social services program on the budget that our community spends on security alone. I could fund a school and a social services program on those funds. We take that security into our own hands, and the next measure of that is going to be telling our communities, you have to show up in droves. We have to be our own policemen. We have to be vigilant. We have to be looking for suspicious activity in our neighborhood. And I should say our neighbors have been very cooperative with that. I think the citizens of Vancouver feel that this is not what they want in their neighborhood. And they have volunteered to take shifts outside of our synagogue to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And so we will be making sure that our community is secure, and we will do that by making sure the community is active. But we really are calling on government to make sure that they do their job and ensure that not only are the laws on the books, but those laws are enforced.
I love to hear that the neighborhood is stepping up. That's a really nice image to end this on. Rabbi Andrew Rosenblatt is the rabbi of the Congregation Schara Tzedeck. Really good to talk to you tonight. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you for having me, and let's hope that we talk in more peaceful times.
Absolutely.